I heard a story about Mark Twain. Somebody asked him, "Do you believe in infant baptism?" And he said, "Believe in it? Hell, I've seen it." So if somebody asks you after today, "Do you believe you can grow alfalfa in South Georgia?" then you can answer them just like Mark Twain did. You can say, "Believe in it? Hell, I've seen it." Apparently, we're going to be able to go out to see Scott McRae's stand today. So you can grow it here. And so the history of alfalfa is really a very long history. I'm going to talk about just one part of it today, but it's actually been a crop since the days of the ancient Persians, through the Roman Empire, all the way into Western civilization. It was brought to the United States in the very early days of as people migrated into this country, they brought it with them. So it entered North America and South America even in the 1600s to 1700s. And now it's a major crop everywhere but in the South. In fact, even with the small acreage we do have in the South, it's growing too, by the way. There's not as many people. 40 years ago, we definitely would have. Everybody kept saying, "I didn't think you could grow it now. I don't think you could grow it in Georgia." Well, it's less of that now. I get less of it. It took 40 years, but we finally got less of it to where, I mean, sometimes you'd be standing in a windrow up to your waist and they'd be saying, "I didn't think you could grow it here." Well, I'm in Georgia and that's a windrow up to my waist, so I can. So it did come in, and so the history of developing the new varieties took place after the introduction in this worldwide, movement of alfalfa all over the world, but especially into North America and even into Georgia. So just in the USA, so once we had all these populations of alfalfa that farmers had brought with them from the old world into the new world, they started developing new varieties that had very specific adaptation zones. And one of the main ones that we grew in Georgia in the early days, and when I'm talking about the early days, probably between the World Wars, but definitely after World War II, when they were starting to use some named varieties that were fairly broadly adaptive, but we used a lot of buffalo. If you talk to a lot of old farmers, they talk about buffalo. In fact, there was a stand south of Athens. When I first came there, a nice stand of the dairyman had was 40 years old. Sorry, not 40. It was about 20 years old, though. And he had been growing it, a guy named Dan Cavendish had been growing it for a long time. He grew buffalo. That was the variety he used. So we had this very broad base varieties that were used, vernal in the north and buffalo and some others in the south. The next phase, and that was when early in my career we were getting into that phase, was what we call the proprietary phase. It was adding traits that were very valuable for the variety to have. And the two main sets of traits were pest resistance. In this case, I'm just showing a couple of aphids and also a disease called Phytophthora. We have that in Georgia. We also have anthracnose. We have a lot of leaf spot diseases. So one thing I can tell you is we always, people say, "Well, gosh, that has a lot of disease problems, doesn't it?" And I said, well, or insect problems. And I say, well, if cattle like it, why wouldn't insects like it? I mean, all organisms are looking for protein and energy. And this is a great supplier of both of them. So, yes. So the early alfalfa breeders, as they were developing these varieties, were definitely trying to get as much pest resistance into them. And there was a lot of good pest resistances in the world germplasm, and they were able to breed all these in. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But Dennis has also just gone over, we also have insecticides, though, when things do get out of control. The other one, though, which was very important, was what we call fall dormancy. Alfalfa has an incredibly long growing season in Georgia. In fact, in Tifton, we were able to have alfalfa growing during a lot of years, unless it's a really hard winter, 10 months out of the year. I mean, we could cut into December, and then we start cutting again in late February. I mean, or grazing. And so it has an incredibly long growing season. And the reason why is because we can concentrate on fall dormancies that are more have more winter active growth. So really, we talk about it as fall dormancy because that's when they go dormant. They either go dormant in the fall if they're number 2s. You can see this picture was taken at Edenton, Georgia during December. And a 2 dormancy would basically be flat on the ground. It would just be dormant. It would go into a dormancy. It would not grow. Then as you get into those semi-dormants, 4, 5s, 6s, they tend to grow a little bit more. But down in our area, down here, and in North Florida, Southern Georgia, Southern Alabama, you would need a lot of winter active growth. You could capitalize on that growth. Why not have it, especially if you're in a grazing system? So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So what we've done in this proprietary phase is allow the varieties that were developed are talked about in terms of what is, for your region, what is the best fall dormancy to have. If you're close to Canada, if you're up in Canada, you're going to want 2s, 1s and 2s. You want that stuff to go dormant. If they don't, the winter's going to take them out. But if you come down to Florida, you want to move toward 8s. We even have some 9s and 10s now, which is almost, they never go dormant. It doesn't matter, but they might have a little more trouble here. But 8s should work pretty well. So that was the other thing. And of course, we have a lot of pest resistances. This is just one that was done in the heyday of the proprietaries. And you can get this, you can see this online. They have them every year. This thing comes out, alfalfa varieties and ratings. But you can see they list all the varieties. This goes down, way down. This starts with 2s. They go all the way down. Then they have some other things like bacterial wilt, all these pest resistances across the top here. So you can find the right dormancy, and if you know a series of pest resistances you want, you can probably select a variety. That works up to a point, but the main thing that we'll talk about that's based in a few minutes is based on that situation we have with adaptation. We still like adaptive varieties. There's something in the adaptation that's good for it. The next phase, being a major crop, and I keep having to remind you of this, this is a major crop. I mean, in fact, a press release just came out from the National Statistics Service. It's just replaced wheat as the 3rd leading acreage crop in the United States. So you got corn, soybean, alfalfa. Wheat is number 4 now. So the only place we don't grow it extensively is in the South, from East Texas and all the way across, especially the Deep South. But that's starting to change. We're starting to see a lot more acreage coming in. But as far as the breeding, because it was a major crop, they also put in traits, biotech type traits. With the first one going in was Roundup Ready. This actually came out in the early 2000s. And now the latest one in these technologies was what we call reduced lignin, which is we really don't have adaptive varieties for those right now. We do have some varieties, but it'll eventually come. But what it does is if you know anything about any forage yield, as yield goes up after you cut it, the quality starts declining. And of course, the management thing, this is a conventional alfalfa, is to try to pick out that best time, and we talk about full bloom or early bloom or bud stage. That's when you maximize yield and maximize quality. And if you're in a commercial hay production scheme or a dairyman, they really are very concerned with that. They want to maximize yield but maximize quality. What this reduced lignin trait does is delay, because your lignin is a component that really reduces the quality. It's good for the plant. It makes it stand up better and hold up better, but it also reduces quality. It seals off some of the digestible, it makes it a little hard to digest for the microbes in the animal gut. So by reducing the lignin, they put in, actually it was very fascinating, we helped work on that project. They actually took the gene, one of the genes in the lignin pathway, and actually flipped it around and put it back in. And when they did that, it reduced the amount of total lignin that was produced. So it's a biotech trait because they use some genetic engineering to do it. But by doing that, what's happened is you can get a little higher yield for the same quality. So it also gives us in the South, potential to have a longer cutting interval. Where you might, if it's raining or something, you can delay your cut and not lose a lot of quality. But the main thing here is that, in just a summary, we've gone from a public phase of just very adaptive varieties to the proprietary phase where we were adding a lot of especially pest resistance traits and fall dormancy traits, to now we're building on those platforms. And in many ways you can look at this evolution is the same way with your cars. When the Model T and Model A came out, they were just wheels, drivetrain, motor, and seats. But that's still the basis of any automobile. And then we started adding things into many of y'all probably remember when we went into things like power steering, power brakes, air conditioning. So that I kind of look at it as an analogy to the proprietary phase. And now I don't know if I just rented a car to come down here from Athens. And the thing starts screaming at me when somebody's over here or I'm backing up. It's got all this technology on it now. I'm not sure I need it all, but it's very frustrating in some cases. But if you buy a new automobile, they've added. So look at it kind of like that. And because it was a major crop, it actually went through those stages. Just also as a way to summarize, and so if you're reading a text sheet or looking even online at a text sheet, you want to see what they'll always list for the variety now, especially a proprietary variety or technology-based variety. They're going to list the fall dormancy rating. You can see this one's a 6. They're going to talk about the pest resistances. And it's you can see there's at least 6 or 7 pest resistances: southern root-knot nematode, spotted alfalfa aphid, fusarium, verticillium, anthracnose, phytophthora. This is one that's adapted for that region. And it has a biotech trait in this case. It has Roundup Ready. And then, of course, it has a complex genetic trait, which is grazing. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, against that backdrop, we started the breeding program at the University of Georgia in 1977. We were complementary to the Tifton program. If you know that many of y'all remember the Tifton program in its heyday especially, it's still a very big program, but when Glenn Burton was there, it was a very big program. They came out with all the Bermuda grasses, all the Bahia grasses, and he did a lot of work in that, pearl millets and those type of things. But they were all warm season. So when we started our program, we concentrated on the cool season grasses, hopefully for the whole state of Georgia, but as you know, mostly for the northern areas and the upper south. But we selected species like alfalfa, tall fescue, red and white clover, orchard grass. I was glad to hear you using Durana clover. We actually developed Durana. We made it a real weed. But it's a very valuable weed. It really is, but it's become real aggressive. But that's what you want in a forage system. You want very aggressive species. So we try to get more persistence. And it was a very large collaborative effort that we used the experiment station complex and throughout the state, and that became a very important aspect of the breeding program. The main thing for not only our alfalfa program, but for all those species that I just listed up there, was grazing tolerance. That's one thing we felt is why alfalfa wasn't used a lot in Georgia or the South. We're grazers here. We tend to be more grazers. We don't put up a lot of hay like they do in the Midwest. We do use hay and we do put up hay, but we would rather concentrate on grazing. So alfalfa was not a grazing tolerant variety. It was more of a hay producer where you come up and cut and carry, we call it. Cut and carry, let it rest, grow up, cut and carry. And it still works perfectly like that. There's no problem, but we just do with our long growing seasons and the ability to graze would have been, and it's turned out to be very important. So adding grazing tolerance, And so we were about the only people in the world, actually, that were looking at grazing tolerance in alfalfa. And we actually came out with a variety called Alpha Graze. And these are just some plots there at Edenton, Georgia, where when we put it under intensive grazing against, in those days, was one of the major hay-producing varieties that was recommended for Georgia, and it had performed very well in Georgia, was Apollo. You can see what happened when we grazed it hard. The alpha graze stayed in. So grazing tolerance, not only for our white clovers and our alfalfas and our fescues, orchard grasses, grazing tolerance became the centerpiece of our program. We also straddled, in that program over this last 40 years, we've also straddled the technology phase. And we were able to work with Forage Genetics and America's Alfalfa to actually get the Roundup Ready trait and put it into an alpha graze based variety. So one of the varieties that's still in the market is a Roundup Ready variety called Alpha Graze 600RR. It's a Roundup Ready variety. So if you're so inclined, you can get that variety. But we continued to develop conventional varieties at the same time. You've heard Dennis and speakers and Jennifer talk about Bulldog 805 and Bulldog 505. They're conventional varieties, more modern alpha graze type varieties. That's a fall dormancy 5, more for the northern areas, and then Bulldog 805, more for down here. And actually the seed company, Athens Seed Company that Dennis mentioned is helping sponsor these meetings, is the licensee for those varieties. And these varieties are good varieties. People always tell me, say, well, you know, I bet you that those cattle don't eat that variety. That's why it's grazing tolerant. They don't eat it. And so it was good to know that the quality, this was the Alpha Graze 600RR. It actually won the hay contest at Moultrie at the Expo 2014. It was actually a Bermuda grass alfalfa mix. And those numbers are crude protein at 25%, RFQs at 240. I mean, this is really super dairy quality hay. So there's nothing wrong with it. You'll hear a lot today about putting it in Bermuda grass. To me, it was always a tool for Bermuda grass. So we have a tool for managing Bermuda grass. We fertilize Bermuda grass with nitrogen. Why not invest that into alfalfa and then carry the quality as an extra component? Increase the quality and doing it instead of fertilizing. So it won't last forever, but if it doesn't last forever, you're back to Bermuda grass. So we really like this use in the South. So not only the grazing component, but also being able to grow it in Bermuda grass. And so this program started, looking at it in Bermuda grass back in the early 2000s. We looked at it, and the guy who was working for me at that time, Donald Wood, did a lot of work. And when Dennis came, Dennis really picked up on it, and it really looked like a good way to utilize alfalfa in the South. But it is, remember, just a tool for the Bermuda grass management. America's Alfalfa, who I'm representing today, since they've got some of our varieties, has expanded that program from the original ongoing demos that are in part of the UGA program, to where now these stars are where America's Alfalfa, working through Athens Seed, and the university is sponsoring some demos. And we'll see, and there's Scott McRae's right there, Scott. Maybe not quite there, but that's supposed to represent your stand. And we'll see this afternoon. So Scott and Will, we really appreciate working with y'all on this program. And this is one we had 2 years ago in Cannon, Georgia, which is northeast Georgia. This is one of the oldest ones that for the America's Alfalfa demo. And this was this was on two sides of the road. This was the one over on this side right here over those trees. That's those same trees. He had cut this, but he had cut that day. And the guy's farmer was Ricky Roper, and he used the alfalfa to feed young heifers during the winter, especially. One bale to in this case four times or 4 board bales of grass hay. And just by using that ratio, he was really able to get really good feeding from that, better intake. But the main thing was he really liked, and we've seen a lot of farmers that use the fall through winter grazing approach. Actually work, just letting them limit graze during the day, run them out there. They're getting their protein, and they seem to be doing really well. And he really liked this, and we've had several other farmers. And of course, he said his cows never look better in the winter. He's been in the business for 30 years, and he said, I never thought my cows could ever look this good. So, is this Iowa? No, this is southern Georgia. Bulldog 805 in southern Georgia, right at the Georgia-Florida line, just south of Valdosta. So we have, Dr. Masawi would normally come on and give the last few minutes of this talk to tell you what he's doing, because I've retired now. But anyhow, he has taken over the program, the whole program, but just real quickly, we could just talk about, his main thing is developing the cool season. That's still a main mission that we're trying to do. Provide genetic solutions. We're trying to provide genetic solutions too. That's what we've done by adding traits, the genetic basis of those to work that out. Just real quickly, I mentioned this in my talk, but he's got a pretty good map to show, if you're looking at, we're starting to talk about BC. This has been a major crop throughout the world. Again, it originated, in around Iran, and in that area of Iran and Iraq, and in that area, in other words, where Abraham was in the Bible. It just moved with the ancient Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and then it, of course, came with the migration into the New World. So it's been around a long time. And it actually came into Georgia. It actually came into Savannah in the 1700s. So we've had a long history of alfalfa in Georgia. It just never became a major crop. So some of the unique challenges that still remain now that we've got good base germplasm is, Dennis mentioned, and so did Jennifer, that liming to reduce aluminum toxicity. But we found there are some data that indicate that aluminum toxicity might have a genetic basis. I should say the tolerance to it or the resistance to it might have a genetic basis. So he's going to be following up on some of this work to see if there's see if he can breed, just keep adding traits onto this material, that we've already developed. Can we add a trait on that'll give it more tolerance? You say, well, you won't ever not lime. No, you won't ever not lime, but it might actually let the roots go deeper and deeper where you can't lime, so that's another thing. So looking at getting better aluminum tolerance into it. So again, low pH tolerance is something he started evaluating from the world collection, over 1,500 accessions from all over the world, looking for this needle in a haystack, so to speak, from a genetic standpoint. But he's picked up a few things that he's pretty interested in, and looks like it has good potential. Then, of course, you've got Dennis mentioned potato leafhopper. It's a new trait. We didn't have a lot of it in Georgia. The good news is potato leafhopper indicates that we might be growing more alfalfa in Georgia, because potato leafhoppers come in. You've got to have alfalfa to bring in potato leafhopper. So just by the fact that it's coming in indicates that we're probably growing more alfalfa. So that's the positive thing. The negative thing, though, is that we need some resistance to it. And there are resistances out there. So he's going to be looking at trying to get resistance into potato leafhopper. And of course, continue to look at root knot nematode. I pointed out in one of those tech sheets that we do have pretty good resistance to southern root knot nematode and even arenaria and some of the root knots, other root knots. But he'll have to keep following up on that, because down in this area, nematode resistance will be very important. Then, of course, is there a genetic basis for getting even better compatibility with Bermuda grass? Is there something, some kind of trait there that he can get in and have better compatibility with planting and with Bermuda grass? Is there a genetic basis for that? We'll be looking at that. And then he wants to know, can he move? We can't really grow fall dormancy 8 varieties, even into northern Georgia. They tend to winter kill. But winter damage and fall dormancy can be broken. That thing can be broken to where maybe they can grow more alfalfa in the northern part of Georgia, even into Tennessee, North Carolina. Grow more of the 8s. That way they can capitalize on a lot more production in the fall and early spring without losing the stand. So that's another thing he's looking at. And then, of course, one thing that was mentioned was Bermuda grass stem maggots. There's a lot of data now that's indicating that you don't have the stem maggot. There's a bigger problem with stem maggots when you grow alfalfa and the Bermuda together. And people who are in the commercial Bermuda grass hay production, they're really worried about this stem maggot. And he wants to know, too, is there a genetic basis for, again, the alfalfa being part of that mixture. So the traits are getting more complicated, but at the same time, that's why you got all these modern genetic approaches. To finish up now, this bulletin, I found it was written in 1914. So we've been doing alfalfa for over 100 years. In fact, there's even data. There's even quotes from the 1800s. From just before the Civil War, there was a historian in Georgia named Coulter who wrote about a guy named Daniel Lee, and he said he's been growing alfalfa and Bermuda together for 5 years. This was in the 1850s. Then Glenn Burton himself, who was Mr. Bermuda grass, who developed all the Bermudas that you know about, all the Tifton Bermudas, he actually grew alfalfa and coastal together from 1950 to 1955 there at Tifton. So we've always had a history. We know how to manage alfalfa. And what was true, like I said, what was true 100 years ago is still true. And I do want to just say, choose an adaptive variety. That was true 100 years ago. It's true in Dennis's new management guide. And a lot of that management guide is in your handout right there too. So.